All right, welcome in. I'm the Kodiak. So it is 2:30 a.m. where I am, which means it is time to rank every team's backup quarterback heading into 2024. A few things I want to acknowledge before I even get into the rankings itself. So I'm doing this to test my ball knowledge because a lot of these guys we A haven't seen them play a lot in the NFL, or B, I don't know. It'll just be cool to see what comes of this. And second thing, I'm assuming all the rookies are going to be starters this year besides Penix. So uh, Brissett is listed as backup here. Who else? Stidham's listed as the backup here. And yeah, that's just giving you a heads up about that. And obviously that won't happen in real life, but for the activity, it makes sense because I don't want to I don't want to compare an established quarterback, an established veteran backup quarterback to a guy who was literally a first round pick. And I used Vegas odds to project the starters for two non rookies. So two teams are having a QB battle between veterans this offseason, the Steelers and the Raiders. And so for those, Justin Fields is going to be the backup, or is the Vegas favorite to be the backup, meaning Russell Wilson's the favorite to start. And Aiden O'Connell is the favorite to start for the Raiders as well, which means Minshew's the backup. So let's start out with a few teams that are unranked, but I do still want to acknowledge these guys as backups in general. So Kyle Trask is the backup for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And why is he the backup? Well, Todd Bowles always speaks very highly of him. He came over, I believe, the year the Bucs won the Super Bowl, so 2021, in the 2021 draft. That's when they took him. I think they took him at the end of the second round, so he's had a chance to at least be in a QB room with Tom Brady, so I guess that counts for something. But the regime really likes him. Like Todd Bowles speaks very highly of him. He always talks about how he helped propel Baker Mayfield into the player he is today. And he has only taken a few snaps in the NFL. I believe it's less than a quarter. So, yeah, I can't really rank him. But how would he do in game action? I mean, I don't know. He looks okay in the preseason, but for the most part, when he did take those snaps previously, he had like a 33% completion percentage. So yeah, and then this is another one where if I were to rank Penix against other veteran backups who are established in the NFL, it just wouldn't make any sense. So for this activity in general, I'm just leaving him completely out. Uh, Overall, my thoughts about him as a prospect, I'm not very high on him, but I get the rationale for why Atlanta picked him. I get the fact that they probably expected the tampering charges for Cousins to be a lot stricter than they actually were, and they ended up getting a slap on the wrist. So I don't know. Maybe if that was their thought process, then yeah, maybe they fumbled the bag. But in general, he was good at Washington. It just remains to be seen how he's going to develop in the NFL. And why I was pretty low on him as a prospect is because you don't want guys who are statues in the modern NFL. And Penix, he doesn't offer a lot of mobility. Like, he had some mobility when he was at Indiana, but he did lose a lot of it when he blew out his knee. So I don't know. Another one that is completely unranked is Hendon Hooker. Why is he the backup for the Lions? Well, he was a draft flyer last year. They took him in the third round after having an incredible year at Tennessee with Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman. And how would he do in game action? I mean, we have no idea. I don't even remember if Teddy Bridgewater, who was the Lions' backup last year, even got any game action. But Hendon Hooker, he was just another, like, all right, let's see what we have. Let's see, what he could do for us in the draft. And now that Goff got his extension, Hendon Hooker is probably not going to start a game unless things go really, really wrong. And Goff, for whatever reason, can't stay healthy, which, I mean, of all the QB injuries we've had this past year, that's definitely in the range of outcomes. But knock on wood, I want Goff to stay healthy. But how would you do in game action? Like I said, I'm not comparing scenarios between guys. This is strictly about how they would perform, assuming all things are equal, how talented I think each one is, how good of a player I think each one is. But he would do pretty all right for first timer. Now, especially playing for Detroit. So with Sean Clifford, this is another one where the regime likes him. Matt LaFleur alluded to his college experience. I believe he's basically like Bo Nix, but if he was a fifth-round prospect instead of a first-round prospect. And the only time I saw him actually play last year was when he completed that one pass in garbage time, like complete garbage time. I think the Packers were up like 45 to whatever on the Vikings. It was that really bizarre Jaron Hall game. and he hit Bo Melton for like a 30-yard pass. So that was more of a middle finger play by the Packers to the Vikings. But how would he do? Well, my Penn State friends hate him for a reason, and they were absolutely agonizing over him. So, yeah. With these two, I'm just going to conjoin them because I want to get into the rankings. So Josh Johnson, why is he unranked? Well, because he has very limited experience. He hasn't played real football in a while. Like, I don't remember him actually starting a game over the past few years. I know he came into the NFC Championship, but that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter for the sake of this exercise because I can't properly rank him. And as far as Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler, these are two guys who have not played a snap in the NFL either, so I can't rank them against established backups. But as far as how they would perform if they were thrown into game action, I mean, I don't know. Wide range of outcomes because Haener was taken in the 4th and Rattler was taken in the 5th. So this organization kind of went with BPA. I mean, Haener was a need last year, but Rattler in general was just BPA. So, yeah, let's get into the actual rankings themselves. So Mitch Trubisky is my lowest ranked backup in the league. And the NFL is an old boys club, and sometimes you can just get a job based on the merits of your experience, and that is what's going on with the Buffalo Bills here. So Mitch Trubisky, he was drafted in 2017 by the Chicago Bears to be their future. And to be completely honest, whenever someone says Mahomes or Watson should have been drafted by the Bears, I'm just like, you are smoking crack if you think either of those guys can develop in what was a disastrous situation in Chicago. Yeah, maybe the talent would have let itself be known, but those guys still, if they go to Chicago, I'm not convinced they turn out either way, any close to what they were supposed to be, or what they did end up turning out to be in Kansas City and Houston instead. But Buffalo is screwed if he comes in. I think Josh Allen to Mitch Trubisky is probably the biggest downgrade as far as quality in positional play that you could find, maybe across the whole NFL. If Trubisky were to have to come in, he would literally just hand the ball off to James Cook on every play. Speaking of a guy who would hand the ball off on every play, we are going with Kenny Pickett. And why he's the backup for the Eagles? Well, he was a first-round pick in the year of 2022, but it really hasn't materialized in Pittsburgh. He seemed to be wildly overdrafted in what was considered a weak quarterback class, and a lot of it seemed to due to the fact that the Steelers took Pickett mainly because he was a Pitt player, and honestly, I haven't seen or heard much to disprove that, because Kenny Pickett has looked very pedestrian in his starts with the Steelers, and as far as his playing time, he's had some playing time with the Steelers, but if he were to get in, like, I would just be like, Kenny Pickett, here you go. Saquon, hand the ball off. Kenny Gainwell, hand the ball off. Will Shipley, now hand the ball off, because Kenny Pickett still has a lot of work to do. I don't really think he's someone you want throwing the ball unless it's like screens to A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. But yeah, Kenny Pickett is 25 for us. Number 24. Now, Easton Stick, he did something truly special last year. The Chargers are one of my bottom 5 favorite teams. And by the way, don't get mad at me. I know that's kind of like hating the kid that gets bullied all the time. But they're a division rival. So naturally, for my favorite team. So naturally, I do not like the Chargers, but he made me miss Justin Herbert, and he made me miss the fact that Justin Herbert has been a mainstay in the NFL over the past 4 or 5 years, and he ended up getting drafted by the Anthony Lynn regime, but the Staley regime clearly saw something in him to at least keep him around, and same with the Harbaugh regime, because they didn't add to that room or anything like that, and although they did add Max Duggan last year in the draft, but yeah, it's kind of irrelevant, at least until proven otherwise. I think Stick's still the backup in 2024. 23, Washington Commanders. Now, we get, if Jaden Daniels is to go down, knock on wood, like I just did there, we are going to get Marcus Mariota being coached by Cliff Kingsbury. Hopefully, that's why at the bottom I say hopefully we don't find out how he is as a player this year, because the only times he's been actually relevant or actually usable within the past few years is when the Raiders started using him on those designed runs that they did in 2021 when Gruden brought him in. But he has multiple seasons as a starter. He was drafted in 2015, number 2 overall, right behind Jameis Winston, another backup, to be Tennessee's quarterback of the future. And that really hasn't materialized. They ran the experiment for 4-5 years, and it looked like he was going to be a below Dalton line quarterback, probably the new Dalton line quarterback until Tannehill came in 2019 and completely revitalized the Titans, and Henry really got going that year too. But Mariota, I remember he was always pegged as like the high upside guy, the guy who could take a step forward, and that just never came to fruition. The last time we saw him start was in Atlanta, and honestly, he got outplayed by Desmond Ridder, which is really sad. 22, Chicago Bears. Now, Tyson Bagent, he did a lot. We saw him a couple times last year, and he didn't look bad. He's a low ceiling game manager, and maybe for a team like Chicago, a team that's really loading up on offensive weapons, that might be all you need because they do have a good running back room. So if you were to find his way into the game, like he has a pretty solid football IQ, but with these backup quarterbacks, they're usually pretty sharp mentally, but they just don't have the arm or athleticism to be mainstays in the NFL. And there's nothing wrong with that because being on an NFL roster is an accomplishment in itself. But yeah, I don't know. Bayesian, he comes in, and what is he going to do for you? He's going to hopefully take care of the football, and hopefully you can win a low-scoring game. Like, that's pretty much what you have to do. Cool story, though. I believe he's from Northwestern, or I know he was undrafted, but was it from a Chicago area school? I don't remember. I probably should have looked that up before I started recording this, but once again, good story. He was kind of like Tommy DeVito before Tommy DeVito, like complete UDFA that came out of nowhere. So yeah, that's interesting. Bagent is 22 for me. 21, Cowboys with Trey Lance. Now, he's a guy who, if he were to get into game action, I think pretty much more than almost anyone on this list, besides, I mean, he's probably on the same wavelength as Penix. Actually, no, because Penix hasn't started yet and Trey Lance has, but he's a guy who, if he were to find his way onto the field, I think people would be really excited to see what he could do because he is a reclamation project and he's going to a team that has a pretty good offensive ecosystem. Like pretty much always, the Cowboys are always a team that can put up 35, 40 points at home to NFC bottom feeders. And then obviously when stuff gets real and they have to make a play and they have to be clutch, it's a different story. But this is about as good of a situation as you could have hoped for if you're Lance because Dak is a UDFA next year too. Actually, is it next year or the year after that? I don't know. But this could very well be the last we're seeing of Dak Prescott in Dallas. And to be completely honest, if they pay Parsons and pay Lamb, you're not really going to have the resources to go out there and find an expensive option. So I would definitely be excited if Trey Lance were to get into game action. How much would I be expecting? Shrug. Big shrug emoji right there. Let me take a water break real quick as you look at my next slide, talking about Drew Lock. So, New York Giants. Offensive play caller Brian Dable, and they brought in Drew Lock, signed him to a 1-year, $5 million contract this offseason. And why is he the backup? Well, experience, and that game he played against the Eagles probably earned him some more time in the NFL. Not to say that he was particularly going to be out of the league or anything like that, but he put on a really good resume of tape that game, and ultimately that's what you're like doing as a backup, because I think guys like Locke and guys like Bagent, I think they know that they're never going to be like NFL starters. Or Locke had his chance to be a starter with Denver, and he did have a season and a third of starting plus other fill-ins, but he did have that great game on Monday Night Football this year against the Eagles. He didn't even play that great. He just had a really awesome game-winning drive. But how would he do in game action? Well, he's kind of like Diet Jameis Winston, because I remember he said in an interview a few years ago that sometimes when the ball leaves my hands, I think, oh no, which is really good and really inspiring on confidence and what you want to hear from the guy that you're throwing out there to win your team a football game. So yeah, Locke, he's one of those guys where he wouldn't I don't think he wouldn't be clueless. He definitely knows what he's doing because he has been in the league for 4 or 5 years, so he would know what he's doing, but unfortunately sometimes he has a tendency to play a little reckless. So yeah, 19, Mason Rudolph. And this guy he's been relatively uninspiring. I don't think he's ever been named the week 1 starter for the Steelers since he's been in the league, and I believe he was drafted in 2018 out of Oklahoma State. That's at least what I think. Oklahoma or Oregon State, I can't remember. But he has shown a propensity to be able to fill in, at least for the Steelers, and he's had, some starting stints here and there. And now he is the backup for Levis. So if the Levis experiment goes terrible, we could be seeing some Rudolph this year. And he's just one of those guys where, once again, he has experience. You know that he'll at least offer you some floor as opposed to some fifth round rookie you could have drafted. So yeah, that's how I kind of feel about Mason Rudolph. 18, we have Jarrett Stidham, and honestly, one of the reasons why he's relatively decently highish on this league when you compare him to other backups amongst the league is because of what he did against the 49ers in 2023 New Year's Day. I forget when that was. I know when that was, but I think, it was New Year's Day 2023, where the Raiders played the 49ers, and he played absolutely incredible, about as well as you could have hoped from one of your backup quarterbacks. And ever since then, he did get his chance to play for the Broncos last year. He did play, I do believe, 2 games for the team, and he honestly didn't offer you that much difference in play from Russell Wilson, which is really sad considering you were paying one $50 million and you were paying one $5 million per year. So he's had multiple starting stints in the NFL. Like, I know he got his chance with New England, he had his chance with the Raiders, but he's a guy, he can come in and he can show flashes. Like, he did make some pretty good throws last year. He did play decent, but ultimately there's some guys who just aren't talented enough to be mainstays in the NFL, and that's kind of a big theme of this presentation. So with the Jaguars, they traded for Mac Jones this offseason. I believe they only had to send a 6th-round pick, and why is he a backup? Well, it's kind of a thing of reclamation project, but also he's a guy who he at least has started some games in the NFL, which, once again, NFL teams do value that trait, especially because he just started a playoff game. So I could see a team talking themselves into him and being like, yeah, all right, let's give this guy a chance. And he's had 3 seasons as a starter. His rookie year in 2021 was really good, but they won a game where he only threw the ball 3 times. So that I don't really put a lot of stock into that. And that was another year where the Patriots defense was just beating up on bad teams. I know everyone tried to say that the Patriots defense was back and all that, but the year afterwards, Bill Belichick's offense really started to take over. Like, the offensive philosophy and what he was offering going forward really started to show up and show out. And unfortunately, Mac Jones got benched a lot. He got benched on Monday Night Football against the Bears for Bailey Zappi. And then this past year, same thing happened. He got benched again for Bailey Zappi, except this one seemed to be a lot more frequent. Whoever was going to be the Patriots quarterback week in and week out, I don't know. It seemed like it was a coin flip at times, but it wouldn't surprise me if he came in and he played decent, because Doug Peterson, he does love his reclamation projects. So I could see a team falling in love with, what Mac Jones does bring to the table as far as intangibles, but is he going to be an impact player when he's on the field? Probably not. He put on some pretty bad film last year, but the entire New England, I think everybody from New England's offense last year just wants a fresh start and wants to forget about the entire year that just happened. 16, Jets, Tyrod Taylor. Now, what I will say about Tyrod Taylor is he has a lot of starting experience, and he has a lot of experience throughout the NFL where he has played pretty well. Like, this isn't like I'm trying to think of a good comp. This isn't like an Andy Dalton where he played multiple seasons as a starter and was, in Pro Bowl consideration at times. Like, I think, actually, he probably does have a Pro Bowl based on his time in Buffalo. But he's a guy, he's probably the most injury-prone backup I've ever seen, which feels really wild to say, especially because he got hurt when he was with the Chargers in 2020 because of the punctured lung. He got hurt in 2018 when he was with the Browns, and then Baker Mayfield had to take over in Baker Mayfield's first career start, and they won their first game in, almost over a year, I think it had been. Because they went 0-17 or 0-16 in 2017, so they hadn't won since, I believe, December 2016 by that point, which is appalling. But I remember that game. I remember that game like it was yesterday. And he also got hurt last year, which led to the Giants bringing in Tommy DeVito. And like I said, he's had multiple seasons starting in random places, and he does offer you some decent floor. But you know what he offers you as far as ceiling, and it's really not that great. He's more of a brain more than anything. He's more of like a culture guy to have in your building. And don't get me wrong, if I was running an NFL team, he's somebody who I'd be excited about but he's not somebody that I would actively feel good about if I had to throw him onto the field. With the Arizona Cardinals, we're talking about Desmond Ridder, and the reason, honestly, one of the only reasons why he's this high is because he has, recently been a starter on a team, and he's given you 13, 14 starts, and he hasn't looked like downright awful. He's had some really, really bad red zone turnovers. Was he a bottom 5 starter in the league of guys who started probably like 13, 14 games last year? Yes, no doubt about that in my opinion, but he's at least fresh enough off of that to where I can say, okay, if he goes to Arizona right next to Kyler, I could see him kind of refining his game and just being all right. Like, he was someone who I absolutely hated as a prospect, so this is something that probably should have taken place when he was drafted, because in no way should he have been thrown out there in the NFL. Like, he clearly was not ready. I thought taking him in the 3rd round was wildly irresponsible to begin with. I thought taking Matt Corral in the 3rd round by Carolina was even worse. But there's literally a video on my channel from 2022 called Desmond Ridder is Bad. Like, that's literally what the title of the video is, and it's explaining how I thought he was a bad prospect. And he's a bad starter, but I could see him coming in and just being a decent backup, especially for a team that needs a mobile quarterback to run their system like Arizona does. So it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if he were to go into a game. Now, 14, Carolina Panthers. We have Andy Dalton, and the reason why he did play some last year, and the reason why he's so high up here is because he's a guy who, once again, he's more of like the, more savvy veteran type of quarterback that I talked about when I talked about Drew Lock. He's a guy, he comes in, he knows what to do. You know that he's not going to have an absolute disastrous performance. You know what to expect. He's not going to put up, like 28 points or anything like that. He's not going to win you a week, but he'll manage the game. He'll be decent. He's kind of like a version of Teddy Bridgewater, who actually throws the ball down the field at this point in his career. And Andy Dalton, he definitely deserves his flowers, especially because he did start 9 seasons with Cincinnati, and then after that he went to Chicago in 2021, and the previous regime, that was when the regime had acquired Justin Fields, so he was kind of a mentor to him there as well. And he's also hopefully a mentor to Bryce Young, and we'll just see where he goes. But Andy Dalton, you deserve a salute. You deserve a shout-out because of what you've done throughout your career, and I do think that he could still play another decent game or two. Now, with the Browns, so their projected backup is Jameis Winston. I know they have a lot of other guys on the roster, like DTR, and there were a few other guys we saw sprinkled in last year, like PJ Walker, who I hope we never see again, despite the fact that he was the XFL MVP. Congratulations to him for that, but I hope we don't see him on the football field ever again, like, honestly. But Jameis Winston, he was drafted to be the Buccaneers franchise quarterback in 2015. And did he live up to the prowess of being the number 1 overall pick? No, but that was a relatively weak draft class. But he was still expected to be really, really good. And unfortunately, it just never panned out that way. He was seen as a player who was reckless, and he had good weapons in Tampa Bay. So he was like, ooh, Mike Evans down the field. Let's, huck it, see what we can get. And he had that legendary 30 for 30 season. One of the most wild rides I've ever seen. And how would he do in game action? It seems like he's gotten better over the past few years, but he is a true roller coaster. Sometimes you can watch him play and be like, why is this guy not, getting an active chance to start on an NFL roster? Why is he going to get benched immediately when the starter comes back? Other times you watch him and you're just like, wow, yikes. Like, this guy has an arm, and his character is also really weird. Like, he's kind of an oddball. Like, I remember seeing that clip from Hard Knocks where he does that really awful rhyme, and Fitzmagic is just like, dude, you sure about that one? Water break. And it made me laugh. I just thought about that. But you throw Jameis Winston in with the Browns. I mean, once again, I try not to compare situations, but Jameis Winston, he's a guy who, he can at least, if you have good weapons, he'll be able to do something. So that's why I put him there. Number 12, Texans, Davis Mills. And he played his way into a backup job. In 2021, he was drafted in the 3rd round. I can't remember where from. Like I said, this is probably something I should have looked up before I started this video, but he played well enough even with a regime change. I know Casario was still the GM at that point, but he played well enough for Ryan and Slowick to keep him as the backup quarterback. And he actually ended up getting into a wild card game this past year, and he found his way onto the field this past year. I think when Stroud ended up getting hurt, was it against Cleveland? Can't remember off the top of my head. I remember they had that regular season game against Cleveland where Amari Cooper had like 12 catches for 250 yards, and I think that's where he got in, but I don't know, my memory might be failing me. But what he was supposed to do, he was supposed to command the Texans for 2 years and be a tank commander, but he ended up overperforming, all things considered, especially his rookie year in 2021 with Pep Hamilton. He played pretty well, and he at least played well enough to where I wouldn't be surprised if he actually was good when he did find his way onto the field again. So, yeah, big ups to Davis Mills. Shout out to him for being able to carve out a role like that in the NFL. So, Joe Flacco, and this mainly is just based on what he did last year with Cleveland, because he wasn't like a world beater or anything, but he was a functional cog in a giant machine, and that's essentially if we end up seeing Flacco again, and if AR has issues staying healthy again, once again, knock on wood, I'll just knock on my microphone so you guys can hear that. Joe Flacco is somebody who's going to come in, and the offense is going to look completely different, but it could be the same concept where he is just a functional cog in a giant machine, and there's nothing wrong with that. And like I said, he had multiple seasons starting in Baltimore. I think he has, outside of Andy Dalton, he probably has the most collective experience of anybody on this list. So, yeah, actually I do think he has the most collective experience of anyone on this list. And clearly the Colts liked what they saw last year, even though in late 2023 he was just sitting on his couch, and he eventually ended up getting his shot to be the backup for the Colts. And I remember he had that insane game with the Jets in 2022, week 2, where he threw the ball to Garrett Wilson and completely shattered the Browns' hopes and dreams in cruel and unusual fashion. But yeah, like I said, he's a medium ceiling game manager. Like, that's basically what I put his archetype as, if he were to find his way into action at some point this year. Number 10, Mike White. Now, I remember he had those spot starts with the Jets in 2021, and he actually looked really, really good. Like, I'm pretty sure that's the best the Jets offense has looked in quite some time. And that's really sad to say, considering the investment that's gone on into the position. Like, they drafted Darnold, they drafted Zach Wilson, and I think Mike White still has the best game from a Jets quarterback ever since Fitzmagic in 2015. And he would do probably pretty well, all things considered, if he were to be thrown into a game right now. He strikes me as a guy who's really mature. He strikes me as a guy who has a really high football IQ. And just intangibly, he is everything that they could want if something were to happen to Tua. I'll knock on wood again. But because I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious. But he is the backup because of his experience. He has found his way onto an NFL roster, and he's found his way into a team where, you know, the Dolphins would be as good of a shot as any to succeed as a backup quarterback. And once again, this is not how I think they'd perform, just, all things equal related to scheme. But this is how I think he is in comparison to other backups in the NFL. And I do think he's a top 10 backup. So good for you, Mike White. Number 9, Carson Wentz. This is a guy who has been around the block, but in 2019, the Eagles signed him to a massive extension. Actually, before that, let's just go back a little further. 2017, he is the MVP of the league if he doesn't tear his ACL. But in the 2017 playoffs, Nick Foles, they win the Super Bowl without Carson Wentz. Nick Foles has the best backup performance of anyone in the NFL. Like, I'm pretty sure we can easily call that run the best backup performance of all time. Like, 100%, no doubt about it. And why is he the backup? Well, he's been around the block. 2023, I believe he was with the Rams. 2022, he was with, I think, the Commanders before they ended up... Did they bench him for Howell? Yeah, they did towards the end of the year. And in 2021, he was with the Colts. And his stats did not do justice to how bad he was that year. 2020, he was with the Eagles, and they had finally realized that even after 1 year of paying him, that it was time to move on. And if he doesn't get hurt in that wild card game against the Seahawks, I think the Colts or the Eagles never draft Hurts because they realized that they needed a more reliable backup to go along with Carson Wentz. But I'm not really sure what happened to Wentz. Like, I know he had that injury, but it seemed like his ability just vanished overnight. And that's really sad because he looked like he was one of the game's up-and-coming quarterbacks at one point. But yeah, so he has had a bizarre career arc, and if he were to play on the Chiefs right now, or if he were to play on any NFL team, he's not somebody who I'm excited about starting wise, but he could probably still show some flashes of his ceiling. So yeah, and he has been on the field pretty recently, so I do take that into account as well. He didn't play at all in 2023, but 2022 is recent enough to where I'm just like, yeah, I could see him coming in and just being at least decently good. So yeah, another guy who's been on the field relatively recently and managed to find his way into multiple backup jobs. And I mean, now with Minnesota, he's probably going to start week one until J.J. McCarthy is ready. And he also found a backup job with the 49ers last year, and we didn't really see him except for in week 18 when they played the Rams because both teams had their playoff seeds locked up by that point. And to be honest, he didn't look like that great. He is another guy who, if he can't succeed in a Kyle Shanahan offense, I just don't really have faith for his success elsewhere. But why is he the backup? Well, being around the block, that's a valuable trait. And being at least relatively youngish to where a team could be like, okay, if our backup goes down and maybe we find something in this guy, maybe we can, get some value out of him or something. Maybe we can flip him for like a 4th-round pick. Or, best case scenario, maybe he just balls out and maybe another team just gives him a shot to start because he's still only 27 years old, and it's not uncommon for guys to have a late surge in their career anymore. So, yeah, we'll see. But ultimately, how do I think he's going to do in game action? I think it's going to be pretty miserable, and I think J.J. McCarthy is going to be on the field by week 5. Like, that's honestly what I think. Now, Josh Dobbs, he had an incredible run last year. He had been on quite a few teams before last year, and the storyline of Dobbs was a pretty fun one last year, at least while it lasted, because he gets traded from Cleveland, and then he goes to Arizona, where the team is expected to be literal garbage. He wins them a few really important games. I believe he won them the game against the Cowboys, 28-16, right? And then he gets traded to Minnesota because Cousins had been ruled out for the year. And he played pretty well. Like, there were a few games where we got to see him on primetime, but the Vikings offense just completely fell apart last year. But with the mentorship of Kyle Shanahan and what he's going to learn working with the San Francisco 49ers, he's somebody that if he's about to get into game action, I don't think he's going to implode. I don't think he's going to necessarily be bad or anything like that. I actually think if he gets into a game, he doesn't really have the ability and the raw physical nature and makeup of an NFL quarterback, but he has the resilience, the hunger, and the football IQ, and it was a really good feel-good story from last year. So I definitely think that based on what we saw last year, he's somebody who, if I were to decide between him and a lot of other options, he's not the worst choice in the world to be your backup quarterback. With the Rams, Jimmy Garoppolo. I've always been saying that Jimmy Garoppolo is a fraud. He is not what you want in a modern NFL quarterback, but now he's not going into the year as a starter. In 2022, I thought it was absolutely egregious that, in 2021, I thought, what was it? What year was it? What year was he with the Raiders? Last year? Yeah, 2023. Okay, I thought it was egregious that they signed him to like a 3-year, $60 million contract or whatever it was, and he got suspended for taking PEDs, and he was still bad. So you're right, you're roided up, and you still can't find success in the NFL. And this is someone who has been given the keys to a Ferrari and just completely let off the gas. He's somebody who got a Ferrari in a race, and he's only driving at 50 miles per hour. When he was with the 49ers, he was only driving at 50 miles per hour, and everybody else was going 85 miles per hour. Like, could you imagine if the 2020 to 2022 49ers had anybody else at quarterback besides Jimmy Garoppolo? Like, Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch and company, they gave up 3 firsts to make sure that Jimmy Garoppolo football and what brand had been established was never going to happen again. So I'm really unexcited about Jimmy Garoppolo, but he is going to the Rams. He is familiar with their scheme, and if he's going to get into a game right now, once again, it's recent enough to where I could be like, okay, this guy probably knows what he's doing. He's not going to win you any sort of games. Like, he's not going to win you any contest, but he's not going to, I think he's not really going to lose you one either. I think it's just going to come down to, can he establish the run game? Can you establish the rushing attack? Can the defense step up? And can he hit the throws he needs to? I know that applies for every backup, but that's pretty much the extent of Jimmy Garoppolo and what he offers at this point. If he can do all that, by all means, perfect. And he is going to be backing up Matt Stafford this upcoming year. That's probably the oldest average age of QB room in the league. Sam Howell, he was drafted in the 5th round in 2022, and I honestly thought that he should have been a lot higher. I thought it was ludicrous that guys like Ritter and Corral were going over him, and he started off as somebody really, really hot in the 2022 draft process. Like, look at those way too early 2022 mock drafts from summer 2021, because you'll see number 1 and number 2, Sam Howell and Spencer Rattler in some order. And he's a guy who I really liked what he offered to the Commanders. I'm so glad that they at least gave him an opportunity, because it could have been so easy for Ron Rivera and company. And Ron Rivera, who else was on their coaching staff last year? Ron Rivera and Jack Del Rio. It could have been so easy for them to just be like, all right, we need to save our jobs. I was thinking of the GM, not Jack Del Rio, but you know where I'm going with this. So it could have been so easy for that regime to be like, okay, we need someone to save our jobs. We're going to go with Brissett. We're going to go with the veteran quarterback. He's going to win us 6-7 games. And this is what more organizations should do, because Brissett is not going to turn your franchise around or anything like that. He played really well when he got his limited action last year, but starting Howell was completely the correct move. And he got the graces to start a full season for the Commanders, and he started out really well. And he had some really good signature performances. I will never forget that comeback against the Broncos. I will never forget how well he played against the Eagles. But they did his best to absolutely destroy his confidence. And now he gets to go to Seattle, where he gets to learn from Geno Smith. And it's kind of like a let's see what we have sort of thing. And he needs to ball out. There are some areas of his game that still need refinement. He takes too many sacks. Sometimes his eyes tell him different things than his brain. But yeah, I'm really excited about Sam Howell's future, and Seattle fans should be too. Number 4, Justin Fields. So you're probably just like, wow, you're smoking crack. You have Justin Fields at number 4. Well, I truly believe that he has been one of the worst quarterbacks in the league over the past few years. The only reason why anybody is excited about him is because, 1, they like highlight runs, and 2, they're obsessed with Madden. And Justin Fields, he's a good highlight quarterback, and he's a good Madden quarterback because he's fast. That's pretty much all he offers. And if he were to get into a game this year, which I imagine he will find his way onto the field at some point, just due to the fact that there are so many reasons to start Justin Fields, at least at some point, even though the AFC North is hyper competitive. The Steelers traded a 6th-round pick for him in 2025, so his value was down the drain. Part of this was, 1, he was Justin Fields and he hadn't shown much in the NFL. 2 was it seemed like Ryan Poles massively overplayed his hand and really, really overestimated what teams were willing to give up for Justin Fields. So they did him right. They sent him to a situation where he could get the chance to grow, and an organization with a lot of stability in the Pittsburgh Steelers. And he got 2.5 and 2/3 seasons to start in Chicago. And he still, once again, he did not win the many games. It doesn't matter that he didn't win the many games more than he looked pretty bad at certain points. And he had 5 or 6 really, really good performances that I can think of off the top of my head. I remember that Thursday Night Football game against Washington last year, and that was insane. But for every good performance he had 2 or 3 really bad ones. And when he was bad, he was catastrophically bad. I will never forget that game against the Buccaneers. in week 2 this past year, where it looked like people were questioning will this guy be on an NFL team next year? And so he finds a home in Pittsburgh, high ceiling, low floor backup if he's ever to get into a game. And with Arthur Smith and with Russell Wilson, let's see, or it's not let's see, since he's there with Russell Wilson, it's let's weld, or let's ride. Number 3, Jacoby Brissett. This is a guy who has come in during multiple stretches, so he did start that whole 2019 year with the Colts because Andrew Luck suddenly retired, but even before that, he played a couple games with the Patriots, and I forget what he got traded to the Colts for, but I know that it was some pretty decent compensation. So he's the backup because of experience and competency, because yes, he is a well-traveled, he's a quarterback who's been around a couple teams, but he has been pretty well. He has played pretty well wherever he's been. And he's had a full year of starting, as I previously mentioned, but he has had multiple other stretches. Like I remember when Deshaun Watson was out in 2022, Brissett filled in, and he played pretty well. So this is a guy who definitely belongs on a team, and this is a guy who's going to start week 1. I don't think it's going to be long before we see Drake May, because Drake May is ultimately too talented to keep off the field forever. But how would he do in game action? I do think he's a solid game manager, and he can hit the throws that you need him to. And I also believe he started 2017. I don't know, that's an aside. My brain's just kind of going there. But, yeah. All right. Number 2, Goat Shoes. So what has he done? He was drafted out of Western Washington, I believe. It was either Western Washington or Washington State in 2019. So he gets drafted to the Jaguars, and he looks pretty good, all things considered. And I know that he was kind of set up to fail when he went to the Jaguars, but he did end up overperforming. Like that 2019 Jaguars team was not good whatsoever, but he ended up dragging them to 6 wins. The next year after that, different story. That was the year where all they did was hand off to James Robinson. But Gardner Minshew, he's somebody who, man, I've been really impressed with his career arc. And obviously he's a meme because he wears, the jean shorts, and he has that like handlebar mustache. And ultimately, he probably just isn't too talented, or he isn't talented enough, like arm-wise, physically, to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. But what can he do? He can hold down the fort. And the Colts won a lot of games last year while he was the backup quarterback. He did play a lot last year because of the fact that AR-15 got hurt. So him and Shane Steichen definitely had a nice little connection going on there. And he plays about as good as you can hope from your backup quarterback. So, yeah, if something happens to AOC, I don't think the Raiders are going to hesitate at their free will to just throw in Gardner Minshew and just be like, all right, this guy's gives us a better chance to win games. And honestly, I wouldn't blame him whatsoever. Yeah, so like I said, with Gardner Minshew, and like you can see at the bottom, as well as you could ever hope, with Jake Browning. And so what had happened with Jake Browning, he had that really, really insane arc. He was the quarterback from Washington, and he got cut by Minnesota in 2019. I remember that because during the Minnesota-Cincinnati game this past year, they made a big deal out of, Browning got released from the Vikings however many years ago, and then he ended up beating them. So, but what really impressed me with Jake Browning is last year, he probably had the best performance from a backup quarterback since Nick Foles won the Super Bowl in 2023. Like, that's how, or in 2018, February 2018, that's how insane some of the things he did last year were. And I will never forget that game against Minnesota, but I will also never forget that game where he went toe-to-toe with Trevor Lawrence. The game didn't end as Jake Browning versus Trevor Lawrence, but it ended up with Jake Browning versus C.J. Beathard. But regardless, he had an incredible performance that day, and he is somebody who he's definitely in due time he's going to be in a QB competition at the very least. Like, is he a franchise quarterback? I mean, probably not. He's 28 by this point, but what he offers you and what he offers the Cincinnati Bengals, a team that Joe Burrow has had issues staying healthy. And besides finding a great backup last year, Cincinnati failed every other test. But you did find a great backup, so That's great for them because you'll know that you have some stability at that position. So yeah, that does it for me. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're not already. Appreciate you guys if you are sticking around to this point, and I appreciate all the love on my ranked videos thus far. Let's hit the outro.